The biggest tragedy is that in Indian history, we haven't exactly acknowledged the 1947-48 war as being a war. We still refer to it as the J&K Ops of 1947-48. In terms of intensity, in terms of the duration, it was probably one of the most difficult wars that we did fight. It lasted more than a year. It started on the 22nd of October when the deed of accession was signed and when the raiders had already started coming into Kashmir. See, what we must realize is that at that time all the road connections etc. were through Murree and through Muzaffarabad, and Pakistan expected Kashmir to literally become a part of their country after independence by virtue of the fact that they economically controlled all the major roads into Kashmir. Banihal at that time was just a track, and it was actually quite a problem getting across from that side. And the Kashmir Valley was entirely dependent for most supplies etc. to be brought in from that side, whether it was fuel or whether it was food or whatever. Maharaja Hari Singh was a Dogra. The population was basically Muslim, and Hari Singh for a while thought that he could vacillate long enough, maybe he would get independence, whatever. He was playing a different kind of a game, which a lot of princes played. I mean, it wasn't something unique to Kashmir, whether it was Hyderabad, whether it was Junagadh, whether it was Mysore. Everybody had their own ambitions. You didn't expect everybody to just fall in line with what the British were saying at that time. So Kashmir held out as long as it could, but Pakistan lost patience, and they, under the garb of tribal Lashkars, they launched a very systematic attack into the valley, not just the valley, but also the Poonch, Rajouri, Jhangar, all that area. They made a grab for it. They were quite certain that they would be able to, occupation is half the game. Once you've grabbed something, it's very difficult to dislodge you. Now, the Pakistani Lashkar which came into Srinagar came in via this Uri road, which runs via Baramulla. When they got to Baramulla, they were basically tribals, but they were being controlled by the army. They were being officered by Pakistani army officers, but there was this whole facade, that we are not involved. We are like, which Pakistan's done again and again and again. I mean, even today, they say we got nothing to do with it, but actually they've got everything to do with it. Here they came, and in Baramulla they stopped, because in Baramulla what these raiders did was they virtually raped every woman that they could get hold of. And not only did they rape them, they took all the loot, and they even carried a lot of these women, they loaded them on trucks and took them back. Now that gap that we got, had the Pakistani raiders not stopped at Baramulla, Srinagar would have fallen and probably met the same fate of Baramulla. The leadership of this so-called Lashkar was thoroughly enjoying themselves. There's a place called Shalatang, which used to be the Maharaja's shooting preserve. They were busy shooting ducks. There was no control over these fellows. They raped people left and right. They shot people. In fact, there was a lot in the Western media also, because a whole lot of nuns and all also got raped. Now that gave us just that little foothold, because when the first Dakotas took over from Palam, not even Palam, sorry, some took off from Palam, but most of them took off from Safdarjung airfield. When the first Dakotas took off, we didn't even know if the airfield was still in our hands. In fact, the brief to the pilots was that if you're fired down, turn around and come back. But they landed at the old airfield in Srinagar. The raiders were just 2 kilometers off outside, and at that time, first Sikh under Colonel Rai was airlifted. Each aircraft was carrying what? It was carrying 15 chaps with their equipment, which was very basic. No, there were hardly any mortars. There was no MMGs. There was no LMGs. I mean, basically, you just went with your rifles. And one Sikh immediately started to deploy. Then the Kumaunis flew in. Then various troops started coming, and 161 Brigade was created under the command of Bogi Sen. There's an excellent book, "Slender Was the Thread," which he wrote, and the title says it all. It was literally hanging by a thread. And there were some very good and bold actions which were undertaken at that time. Timaya was made the Jack Div commander. We used tanks to push the raiders back from Zojila. That was a major turning point in the whole invasion of J&K. The real turning point was the Battle of Shalatang, where again the Indian army was very, very lucky, because what happened was they had deployed on the road coming in from Baramulla at a place called Shalatang, and an armored car troop with some Bren gun carriers had got behind these guys by accident. And when they came from that side, these raiders were very happy. They said, because they were basically Jat troops, so they were not even Sikh troops. They were patting the turrets of the armored cars and saying, "Arey, ye to hamari hai," because. But when they were sandwiched, the armored cars opened up, the Kumaunis opened up from either side of the road, the Air Force came in with Tempest. It was a rout. And they started running. I mean, there were 500 odd vehicles burning on that road, and then they just fled from there. They left everything, they ran for their lives till they got to Uri. And at Uri, then again, they blew up the bridge, all kinds of things happened. They managed to reorganize themselves. We made a mistake. We didn't go beyond Uri at that time. Maybe we would have taken it. Some incredible operations were fought. Ladakh, the airfield was built while the raiders were just 6 or 7 kilometers away. They were at a place called Nimu. We lost Skardu. Skardu was a big, big tragedy. And when Skardu fell, the Pakistani raiders, they sent a telegram which said all Hindu women raped. I think all women raped, all Sikhs killed. And that was the biggest tragedy of the war, in my opinion, because had we managed to save Skardu the way we managed to save Punch, the way we managed to save Rajouri, the way we managed to save Leh, it would have been a different story. Simply because the Gilgit River comes in over there. And had we taken Skardu, the northern areas of Kashmir, which Pakistan has played havoc with since then, there's the occupied POK area and there's the northern area. The northern areas, they played complete and absolute havoc, because they later went on to virtually cede that area to China. The Karakoram highways come through that entire area. But had we fought and taken Skardu at that time, then that Karakoram highway would never have happened. But 47-48 is one battle which we have not really recognized the true valor of the Indian Army. The officership was excellent. These were all chaps who had fought in World War II, and they all, whether they were Air Force guys, whether they were Army, whether they were infantry, whether they were Armored Corps, they performed exceptionally well. And this is the Indian Army which, this country really should have cherished like that. But instead what happened? A lot of chaos began, once the matter was referred to the UN. Now everybody talks about the plebiscite. The plebiscite's a joke, because everybody says that India doesn't want to hold the plebiscite. When the plebiscite was talked about, it is Liaquat Ali Khan, the Pakistani Prime Minister, who said no, because the first precondition was that all Pakistani troops will be taken off the soil of Jammu and Kashmir before it can be held. They could never agree to that. But one lie after the other, and we keep proving to the whole world. In 47, we said, see, they were Pakistanis. Now they are writing articles and openly saying, yes, it was us. In 65, we again said, Nani, they are Lashkar, they are tribals. Then now they say, we did it. So how many times are we supposed to, every time we make this big point that yes, we proved that they are Pakistanis and they're backed by Pakistan, they are Pakistani troops. But, beyond a point, how does it matter? It is eventually left to the Indian soldier at the point of a bayonet, who has to stand up and guard that frontier of yours, because we have to realize that Kashmir is the head of the is the head. It is you chop that head off or you breach it, where are you going to go? There is no question in my mind. Kashmir acceded to India. Kashmir went through the entire league. In fact, we were too legalistic about the whole thing. If there's any flaw in the whole thing, it was like, we wait for the deed of accession to be signed. I'll tell you a small story about that. Alistair Lamb, a very famous British author, somewhere along, I think in the early 2001, 2002, he wrote a book and he said the deed of accession is forged. It was that VP Menon and Sam Manekshaw, the two officers who were supposed to have gone to Jammu and got Maharaja Hari Singh to sign, they never went. So there was an uproar. I mean, Pakistan, Oxford University carried this book and it was all over the place. Parliament, these questions were being asked. And purely by chance, somebody asked me about it and I said, listen, it's very simple. Get hold of the logbooks of the pilots who flew the aircraft to Jammu. It was aircraft, the tail number of that aircraft was VP04 or something. We got the logbooks. In the logbooks, it clearly says these are the passengers on board. Deed of accession was signed and we brought it back. And you cannot fudge a logbook because a logbook is like, it is signed every day over the years by the pilots, etc. So, we have never given ourselves and the people who have died defending this the honor of actually telling the truth and documenting history the way we should. Because unless we start telling these stories to our kids and our schools and our colleges and tell them what's really at stake, they'll never know. And when they don't know, then a whole lot of issues start off, which then create their own problems, because those who do know a little bit about it turn around and say, what are you talking about? That gap has to be bridged. A lot of people feel that going to the UN was a big mistake. This was Mountbatten's influence on Nehru, which eventually forced him to take that move. And in my opinion, this is what led to the 65 war. Because very few people know this, but Mountbatten was back here in 63 and 64. And he is the one. He came back, he was chief of staff after having been the Viceroy of India. He took a bit of a gap, then he comes back as CDS in the British Army. He comes back to India in 63 after the Chinese debacle, and he is the one who again started this whole business. In fact, he got Nehru to release Sheikh Abdullah and start talking about Kashmir all over again, because he told him your role in history is will never be defined until you solve Kashmir. Now again, Nehru, the same Prime Minister who had made that horrendous mistakes in Panchsheel, was beginning to do the same thing in 1965, which actually gave Ayub Khan the handle and the stick that he was looking for. And in my opinion, that's what led to the Ran of Kutch and then the subsequent events which all happened. It's all interlinked. And the lessons that we also have to learn vis-a-vis today's context in Kashmir, we cannot, and I think we are making a mistake here, we cannot isolate it from the overall ISIS problem which is coming up in the Middle East, etc. They're right at your doorstep. The Taliban's right at your doorstep. I mean, how long are we going to put our head in the sand and pretend that it does not affect us? Of course it affects us. They're right there. And Kashmir is one of the major rallying points which is used as propaganda by these mujahids and so-called, they are basically terrorists. And they will use every mean at their disposal. When they set off a bomb, it doesn't matter if a 3-year-old is ripped apart. But you see, it's a very funny game, because if a security guy does anything, he's under the scanner, because everybody is going to say, excessive force, this, that. Whereas, when he gets his head blown off, nobody does a thing, nobody's there to guard him. And the only solution to Kashmir is to actually first figure out what the real problem there is and then tackle it. There is no question of Kashmir ever breaking off from India, because Kashmir is a valley in a larger state. There's Ladakh, there's Nubra, there's Baltistan, there's Zanskar, there's Jammu, there's Udhampur, there's Rajouri, there's Poonch, there's Jhangar. I mean, why are we only looking at one valley? You can't do that. You can't say tomorrow that Haryana is fine, but Gurgaon wants a separate identity. I mean, it doesn't work like that, And the sooner people realize this, that there simply cannot be any chinks, then the enemy, and I'll use the word enemy very clearly, Pakistan will not be able to exploit you. They will always exploit whatever chinks you offer them. And we must, as Indians, remember one thing. The gates to India have always been open from within. Don't let it happen.